Okay, so this video is to help you with trigonometry. Trigonometry only works for right-angled triangles, so whenever you see a right-angled triangle in an exam question, you know it's either going to be trigonometry or perhaps Pythagoras. The clue is usually whether there's an angle involved or not. Pythagoras only involves the three sides, whereas trigonometry involves an angle. So if it is a right-angled triangle, and it does involve an angle, the first thing to do is label up the sides. So the hypotenuse is always the diagonal side, or another way of putting that is that it's always the side which faces the right angle, which is opposite the right angle. So that's easy, and then which side is opposite and which side is adjacent depends upon which angle you're using. So if I'm dealing with this angle, this is the adjacent side. Adjacent means next to, so all we're really saying is this is the side next to the angle. And this would be the side which is opposite or facing the angle. However, if I was using this angle, those two would swap around. This side would be opposite it, and this side would be adjacent it. So opposite and adjacent depend upon which angle you're using. Hypotenuse is always the longest side, the diagonal side, the side facing the right angle. And what we usually then do is write out this little nonsense word here, SOHCAHTOA. And I'll show you how to use this in the next example. So suppose this is your problem and you're told that that's 30 degrees, the hypotenuse is 10 centimeters, and you've got to find the length of this side here. Well, as we said before, you start by labeling your side. So that's the hypotenuse. That's the opposite. This one would be the adjacent. So we write out our little word SOHCAHTOA, and to find out whether we're going to use sine or cos or tan on our calculator, we'd look back here and figure out which side is not involved in this problem. The hypotenuse obviously is, because we know what it is. The opposite obviously is, because that's the whole point of the problem. But the adjacent, we don't know what it is, and we don't care what it is. So we really don't need to bother with the adjacent at all. So we cross off anything that's got an A in it. That's how come we cross off these two parts, because we know that this problem doesn't involve the adjacent. And that's how come we know that it must be this part of the little saying here, the SO part. So this is a sine problem. So if you write out the three letters, starting with the first one in the bottom left-hand corner in a magic triangle, which works in exactly the same way as the speed, distance, time triangle, and you stick your finger over the bit that you're trying to find. So I'm trying to find the opposite, so it leaves me S and H on the same row, which means that they're timesing each other. So O equals S times H. What that stands for is the length of the opposite, which is the X, equals the sine of the angle, times by the hypotenuse. Notice that I've closed the bracket here before I've done the timesing by the hypotenuse, otherwise the calculator will think you mean sine of 300, which will give you a very different answer. So if you type exactly that into your calculator, you should get 5. If you don't get 5, double check that the little tiny text at the top of your calculator screen has got a D showing and not an R or a G, in which case you may need to change your calculator mode. So this is how you would use trigonometry to find a missing length from a triangle, and this is how you would use it to find an angle. So we're going to start with labeling up the triangle in exactly the same way. This is the angle, so this side is opposite and this side is adjacent. So this time it's the hypotenuse that's not involved in the problem at all, so I can scrub out those two parts of SOHCAHTOA and I know that it's going to be a tan problem. I write out my triangle, and if I'm trying to find the angle, I always need to use the sine or the cos or the tan of that angle. So if I stick my finger over that, it tells me that I need to do O divided by A. So what this tells me is that tan of my angle is O divided by A. And what unfortunately has slipped off the bottom of the screen here is that the next step is I need to do the angle itself will be shift tan of 20 over 12, and when you type that into your calculator you should get 59.0 degrees.